Well, that's the point. That's why we're all here. Okay. So I'm gonna put it on the screen. I'm sorry. It was supposed to be copied, but it wasn't here. Okay. So, Rabbi Tali Adler, who is one of my colleagues and teachers at Hadar, who she is now currently doing the weekly Devar Torah on Hadar's weekly email. So if you're interested, you can follow. I spent 3 days studying Talmud with her in March, and she was excellent. So I highly recommend her, and that's actually the base. Her class is the basis for, if you come and hear me teach on the Tikkun Le'al Shavuot in June, that's basis of 3 days of Talmud study with her. That's enough. So Hadar always gives a big lecture pre-Pesach, the Stern lecture, as you can see here. Rabbi Adler taught it. You can find the whole video on YouTube if you just Google her. But I watched it last week and thought it was very moving. So I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but the Pesach story and the story of Exodus can be read as a ghost story. I don't know if you're big into ghost stories or not, but she is going to suggest pretty well that the Haggadah is a ghost story as well. So, yeah, let's dim the lights with the flashlights.
We need a.
So
Fire.
when we think of Pesach, when we think of the Haggadah, when we think of the story of the Exodus, we think that it is a story about liberation, a story about triumph, a story about joy, maybe a little awe and reverence, right? The plagues and the splitting of the sea and everything, miracles, right? Do you think about ghosts?
No.
So,
Something not kosher about ghosts.
well, I mean, the Torah doesn't like ghosts, but that's okay, right? So, oftentimes the basis of our stories really are formed from where you begin the story. And oftentimes there are options for where the story can begin. Right? If you tell your story, right? I asked Cindy, right? Tell me your story, right? You can begin at birth, you can begin where you were raised, you can begin at college, you can begin where you met Jerry, you can begin where you had kids, you can begin where you joined Bethany, you can begin where you joined B'nai Yeshurun, right? And like we can go down the list, right? We have a lot of starting points, right? You can start at retirement, you can start at your first career, right? Like, right, you can start where you moved, right? I lived in Israel, I moved to Cleveland, right? Like we can tell our stories from different places. And that's the basis of all these movies and these prequels and all that's right. That's the whole thing of Hollywood now, right? Oh, we didn't tell you this part of the story, right? It can make another X many $1 million, right? With this, right? So where does the Passover story begin? If I was just gonna ask you, where does the Passover story begin usually? We were slaves in Egypt. Right?
Wandering.
Actually, in our Haggadah, there's two versions, right? We actually tell two stories in our Haggadah, but the classic story is we were slaves in Egypt. We cried out to God. God heard us. God freed us, took us out with an outstretched arm and a mighty hand.
Or you can start with Bechirat Yosef.
You're gonna get to my whole spiel already. Yes.
You could start.
Yes.
Folds them into.
That's exactly. So that's what we're gonna say is there are two ways to look at the Passover story. We tell this story, we were slaves in Egypt, but there's another beginning. Right? So let's just look at her source one, which is the ghost story, as you can see, is how the book of Exodus begins. Is the book of Exodus the story of the Exodus, one would think? Okay, so someone want to read to me in English? All right, go for it, Karen.
The names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Yaakov, each coming with his household. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. The total number of persons that were Yaakov's issue came to 70, and Joseph being already in Egypt.
Period. Stop right there. Okay. What's sticking out here?
That didn't go.
Okay, I'll tell you what's sticking out to me. All right, you just told me about all the people that came to Egypt, but
Yosef was already there.
Right?
Anybody?
Somebody's already there. Joseph is already in Egypt. Right? So there is a story before a story, right? This story is about how, what's the opening line? How Israel came down to Egypt. Oh, and by the way, some of us were already there. Right? It doesn't say because of the sale, because we tricked the father, right? It doesn't say all those elements, right? It doesn't talk about the deception. Nothing. All it says is, oh, and some of us were already there. I mean, do you tell the story? Yeah, you moved to Cleveland. I mean, maybe you already had family here, maybe you had something, or is this like some miraculous, like I've never even heard of Cleveland and I ended. You, right, but other people, maybe. Like, again, it's how you tell the story, right? And that's very important. Right, so there is a beginning before the beginning. We didn't end up in Egypt by accident. Right? We were there because of a tragedy precipitated by an unthinkable, hateful event that tore a family apart. Right? Their brother was sold into slavery and they deceived their father. Right? Anything else stick out to you?
Yes.
No?
So
Israelites were fertile.
were there other people that didn't come?
The people that didn't come, that's a good question. We don't know who else came, but Joseph was already there. Can I show you the last line of the end of the previous book of the Torah? Genesis, the last verses of Genesis. The Hebrew's there, but we'll show you the English because most of us are English speakers. So I want to read at length. At length.
I'll read it. At length Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die. God will surely take notice of you and bring you up from this land to the land promised on oath to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. So Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, when God has taken notice of you, you shall carry up my bones from here. Joseph died at the age of 110 years, and he was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt.
Okay.
Question about that.
Yeah.
He was embalmed.
That's the
Embalmed.
But that's the Egyptian
The
style.
Egyptians.
Number one, Egyptian practice. Two, right, we do it because the Torah and tradition forbids it. This is this. This is before Mount Sinai. This is before getting the Torah, right? So that was Egyptian practice. Okay, so when we read this, what is happening in these last two verses of the book of Genesis?
Promised that they will leave Egypt and go like was promised by God to Israel.
Yeah.
God will help them. Yeah.
Yeah, and the translation here I want to fix, right? This God will surely take notice of you and bring you up. It is stronger than take notice. God will redeem you. Let's translate it a better way. God will redeem you. And the Hebrew is, for the Hebrew speakers, hakod yifkod, these two words, and that is a very strong phrase. God remembers the promise that was made and will redeem you. So there's two pieces in this section. Piece number one is redemption will come to you. And what's piece number two? What do you have to do?
Bones.
Take the bones. Where do you have to take the bones?
If you know that you're going to be redeemed,
Mhm.
okay, so then why would I self-afraid to go in across the river? You can do that and get out.
That was generations later.
Yeah, that's later. Yeah. Are you saying the sea? What are you saying? Which river?
Reads.
I mean, they were gonna get killed otherwise. Yeah. You mean when Pharaoh was chasing them?
Be redeemed.
Yeah.
So if they're going to be redeemed, they should have had more faith.
Yeah, yes.
I mean, yes, no one's disagreeing with, yes, they should have had more faith.
Looking back, it's easy.
Yeah.
The thing that I always look at in this verse is that it sounds to me like Joseph, the second youngest of the 12 sons, was the first to die. And the second thing that's noticeable to me is he was, for those generations, he was young.
Okay, so here's an answer for you, by the way. Do you think his life was easy?
No,
No.
Did he have trauma to his body?
Absolutely.
But he looked
Right,
very
so, okay, but as Ron was saying, that actually was young in that timeline. So, you know, if I want to look, now I'm gonna throw in some contemporary pieces.
Rabbi,
Yeah, oh,
I'm sorry, they're in Israel, they're in Egypt right now, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
yes,
Right? So
Yes.
why are they talking so gloom and doom? They're not slaves yet. They're just a bunch of people moved there, been living there for a while. Why didn't they say, you know what, get up and get out now? It's already presupposing that they're so stuck here that they're gonna have to wait a long time to take.
or, so I will propose to you what Rabbi Tali Adler proposes. These are the two most important sentences in the entire section. This is the only way redemption is ever gonna happen to the Jewish people, and this is the only way it's gonna continue to happen. Yeah, but
If they stay.
but let's take away from the actual taking of the bones, what does that mean? When they take the bones, that actually is something. So number one is they are bringing home that which was taken from a home. Contemporarily, right, we are currently in a situation where 59 Israelis have not been home. Their bones are somewhere else. Correct? And perhaps their life has been shortened because they lived in depravity and in captivity for a certain time period, and maybe that's why their life was shorter.
Yeah.
And so there's this piece. So let me give you what Rabbi Tali Adler says about this. The first is that there are two very important information and requests in this. Number one, God will actually redeem you. Number two, the only way you will be redeemed is if you bring my bones home. That you will not leave me behind, and that you have a responsibility. So before I sort of go on, who is Joseph talking? Who's he making promise that they will bring his bones home?
His brother.
His brothers. Now, you might not know, but a chapter before, the father Jacob dies. Jacob, what does Jacob make his children promise?
Bones, the same.
That he will be buried.
In Israel.
Yes, but who promises? His children. Does Joseph have children?
Yes.
Yes, the
we read
prime.
it, Prime and Menashe.
Yeah.
So if we were gonna take that parallel, who should promise to take Joseph's bones to bury?
His
sons.
kids. His sons.
Kids. So Dafka specifically, why then does the Torah say that his brothers are the ones that have to promise? Because they
Because they
are,
are sold him.
because they are taking responsibility and doing some level of restitution and reparation
What
for
they
the
did.
horrible trauma action that they did years ago. That's the only way that redemption is gonna happen, is if you take an action to admit responsibility and literally bear that responsibility by carrying your brother's bones home. Let me just give you a little bit more from Tali. The decision to tie together redemption with accountability of a wrong, the acknowledging of the mistake is the key here. For generations as Jews, our redemption and our responsibility to bear guilt for our actions are intimately tied together. True redemption only happens when we tell the truth about who we are, about what we believe, and what we have done. Yes?
Yes.
Yes, like in redemption,
Sure.
full redemption is impossible if we don't acknowledge our mistakes.
פשט
Correct?
חטאתי, פשעתי, אביתי.
Correct. Joseph teaches us guilt and redemption are able to live together, but it runs against instincts we have. Can I tell you what the instincts are, according to Rabbi Tali Adler? If we are engaged in a very important mission, that we have a right to ignore or deny guilt for the sake of the success of a mission. We believe we are doing a service by denying guilt, because if we acknowledge guilt in the moment, we could jeopardize the success of a mission. What does that sound like?
Seems like that was.
Yeah.
Yes.
What was the last line? If we ignore.
If we acknowledge guilt, we could jeopardize the future of and success of a current mission that we're on. Right? Things are going okay. Right? Things are going okay, right? We don't have to acknowledge all the trauma that was caused, what we've left in our wake. Right? As long as we continue to move forward.
That's wrong. It's like saying that you can kill somebody because it will be better without him.
Right, so, yeah, do you agree with this idea that Rabbi Adler is proposing? That in order for full redemption to happen, you have to acknowledge your guilt?
Which is not easy.
That's for forgiveness.
No,
Yeah, but we do tshuva, if you encounter the same situation again, you have to.
Yes.
no.
This-
Say two things. One, don't forget the past.
Hmm?
But you have to at a certain
Oh.
point move on, because if you don't move on and you live only in the past, there are people who have been hurt by somebody saying the family,
Mhm,
and they can never move on
mhm.
from that hurt.
I mean, here's a question. Yeah, Bob?
If your mission is righteous,
Mhm.
you acknowledge the problems, should acknowledge the problems that occurred along the way.
Mhm.
You don't bury them. You acknowledge those and you deal with them. And it won't affect
Mhm.
the mission if the mission is righteous.
Gary's showing me how to make a perfect apology.
Oh, good luck.
Good luck.
Acknowledgement of responsibility, offer repair, express regret. This is tshuva.
Mhm.
Explain what went wrong, declare your repentance, and then ask for forgiveness.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is tshuva.
Yeah.
Okay.
So here's my question.
I-
I'm gonna say this because I'm gonna get political. But right, like, again, right, there's a question. Has Israel admitted, accepted responsibility? I'll just look at October 7th for a sec, right? Right? Or what happened on October 7th?
Just starting.
No.
Right, but have you heard
No.
that? I'm just gonna say one thing. Have you heard people say, right, we can't really focus on October 7th until the war is over?
Yes.
Right, that's exactly what this, I'm not saying right or wrong, right? I'm saying, right, we have to, we can't acknowledge that because it might jeopardize the mission. Have you not heard that? Right, so again, I'm not saying right, wrong, what Israel did, what government, what didn't, but that's like connected to this, right? Okay, now politics are over, so,
Thank God.
okay, thank God.
I wish they were.
Okay, so,
Don't change.
yeah, right, and we can apply this to American government, to a lot of, to business. I mean, how many businesses have probably made huge moral questionable things to get their product out,
Yep,
Yep.
yep.
right? Or pharmaceutical, whatever else, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right? And didn't acknowledge, right? Again, like this is just about getting this product out. How I'm gonna help right? This is gonna help people,
Yeah.
right? And not admitting the only way that you can fully understand what it is and appreciate or not appreciate is to acknowledge everything that happened, the wake that it left. Okay, so now let's talk about the process of actually finding Joseph. So I will tell you, right, you can see here in Joshua, the bones of Joseph were brought, and where were they buried? Right, so this is talking about when they finally, the Jewish people, the Israelites, came to Canaan, they conquered Canaan, and they buried in Shem. Anything important, is that an important place? What happened in Shem?
Forefathers, that's
Yeah.
where they were all
What?
buried.
The Dinah story.
Dina, yeah, something else happened in Shem.
Well, didn't all our forefathers were buried there?
No, that's not Shem.
No, but Abraham bought a place. That's not in.
So I will tell you what happened in Shem. Is the brothers sold Joseph in Shem.
Oh. זה היה בשכם. I didn't remember.
I'm pretty sure. Take a look. I could be wrong. Something happened with Joseph's story anyway. Yeah, you can check the videotape. Shem is an important place in the story. So there's some like restitution here, some restitution happening. So let's talk about how they found Joseph's bones. So you might know.
If he's buried in Shem, if that's where they sold him. In Shem,
Mhm.
know that that's restitution because Shem wasn't that close to home. He was sort of left in a pit. That was not close to home.
If I'm not, I believe Shem was the site where the Mishkan dwelled until the temple was built. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yes.
I mean, so it was an important place. So Shem was the sort of spiritual capital until
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem. That was for a long time. How,
Yeah.
like,
That makes
years.
more
like
sense.
a couple hundred years, yeah.
That was 4.
The church of him.
A couple hundred years, so like it was an important place. Yeah. Okay, so while the Jewish people were preparing for the exodus to Egypt, and they sacrificed, or when they slaughtered the Paschal lamb and put the blood on their doorposts, when they ate the maror and matzah that night before leaving Egypt, Moses didn't do that. According to the Midrash, what did Moses do? What was the mission that had to go for redemption? What do they have to do? What do they, oh, you're looking at the screen. I'm not gonna cover the screen. What did they do? What did they promise Joseph?
The bomb.
They would retrieve the bones, right? In order to leave Egypt, they had to bring Joseph's bones home, but there was a problem.
Where they were.
Nobody knew where they were. Nobody knew where they were. They didn't like just keep them around, right? They didn't know where they were. This was the night before they was leaving. Everybody else was having the first Seder ever, except for Moses. Looking for the bones in order so the people could leave.
Anybody.
So there is a, now we'll get into Rabbi Jacobs and Midrash. There's a Midrash that Moses had to figure it out. So can someone read to me how Moses figured out where the bone? Yeah, Cindy.
How did Moshe know where Yosef had been buried? They said
Sarah.
daughter of Asher, was of the same generation, and she went and said to Moshe, in the Nile River, Yosef is buried. Moshe went and stood at the Nile River and said, Yosef, the time has come for the Holy Blessed One to redeem Israel. Behold, the Shekhinah is delayed for you, and the Israelites are delayed for you, and the clouds of glory are delayed for you. If you reveal yourself, good, and if not, we are cleansed of the oath which you have sworn upon our fathers. Then the coffin of Yosef floated to the surface, and Moshe took hold of it and went.
So number one, they found the oldest person ever alive. This is saying she was from the time of Joseph.
Yeah.
So there was this one old wise woman, Sarah Bat Asher, who lived for like 400 years.
Oh, and never-
Right? And they found her
They
and
found
she's the only person that remembered where he was buried. Very interesting. Where did his where was his coffin put?
In the Nile.
There's so much symbolism about the Nile River and Moses, right? And so much death in the Nile River and that this is the thing that was needed for the Israelites to seek to be freed. Right? And then Moses does a sort of declaration, right? Like it's time. Appear, right? I'm fulfilling the promise. And if you don't show up, you're done. I fulfilled the commandment and then magically, right? Sort of like, a King Arthur thing. What's that Lady of the Lake thing, right? Like appears, right? There's also multiple versions of Excalibur, right? By the way, right? I think, right? Isn't Excalibur come out there and also the sword in the stone, right? So, right? And he takes it. And then you can read that like they carried 2 arks. They carried the ark that was Joseph's casket, and they also carried the Aron HaKodesh, the Holy Ark with the 10 Commandments. They carried both around for the 40 years of wandering in the desert.
They didn't have it.
So for 400 years, Joseph was in denial?
Yeah.
Good one.
No, the Jewish people were, the Israelites. That's why they weren't redeemed. So have we sort of set the theme enough? So now what Rabbi Tali Adler looks at is, okay, we talked about Yosef as an essential part of the Exodus story. And redeeming Joseph and his ghost story is an essential part to why we were freed. So if that is so, do we include Joseph at all in the Haggadah on Pesach night? Anyone, do we include Joseph in the Haggadah on Pesach night?
I don't recall
I
him.
think so.
Do we ever make any direct?
But then we don't include Moshe.
I know.
Yeah, Moshe's for a different reason.
You spend it every year.
So what she claims is there are 3, or what she found, is there are 3 potential places where Yosef appears, or at least under the surface appears. The first is from this famous Rabbi Batz on the Haggadah. Can someone read this commentary on the Haggadah? And now.
And now, the answer to the question Manishtana is that we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and our rabbis taught that one should begin with disgrace, and the disgrace is based on what the Midrash states. You sold your brother Yosef as a slave. By your lives you will have to recite each year. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and the glory is that just like Yosef became king, so too we are free.
Right? So when we ask the question, Manishtana, and we say we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, that's a code. What it means is you are in Egypt because you sold your brother Joseph into slavery, and that led you to become slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. Right? How did we end up in Egypt? We may not say it, we may sing Avadim Hayinu and say we were slaves in Egypt, but what we mean is that it's because of what we did to Joseph.
But you go
But
back.
on the other hand, we did not have food in Canaan, and therefore we had to leave, and that's how we found.
But they only went there because of what happened, and if they hadn't sold their brother, he never would have been there to do that.
Yeah, it's this circular story, and there are many versions of, and very different ways to read this story. Did you want to say something?
I was gonna say that, I mean, yes, they sold Joseph into Egypt, but it was predicted 3 generations earlier. God told Abraham 3 generations earlier that they would be slaves. Whether this is the way he meant for it to happen, that's another story.
Mhm.
But it was going to happen.
So here, there's a slight piece that we didn't catch yet, so. Which, there's this line, right, our rabbis teach that you always begin with disgrace. and that you end with redemption. That is I don't know if you know, there was a trajectory, there's a path of the Haggadah, right? We go from shame or disgrace to redemption. We go from slavery to freedom, right? We go from this to that, right? So Joseph is the disgrace and the shame, but Joseph is also the redemption, right? And the glory is that just like Joseph became king or second to king and Pharaoh, so too we are freed. So it's Rashbaz is not just saying we are guilty and we were slaves in Egypt because of Joseph, but also where we're freed because of Joseph. What do you think?
Okay.
You can see it, but you never thought of it that way until now.
When is Rashbaz?
Oh, it is, I don't remember. I have to look up what someone on Google Rashbaz, I don't remember. Okay, that's option one. Option two. In the Haggadah. But yeah, I skipped. There's a lot here. Okay, option two. Let me just see. Oh. Okay. Anyone here slaughter a Paschal lamb?
Not lately.
Not lately. Okay.
No.
Nobody's
Okay,
a shepherd.
but it used to be in the time of the temple, right? For more than 1,000 years after the Exodus, this is how you practice Pesach, right? You slaughtered the Paschal lamb and you ate it, right? As a family. So Tachim, the Talmud, talks about how the slaughtering and the process was done. So would someone like to, Mike, you want to read us about the slaughtering process?
First group exited the temple courtyard with their Paschal lambs. Was taught in a Baraita. Each and every one would place his Paschal lamb in its hide and cast it over his shoulder behind him and carry it home that way. Rabbi Elish said they carried it home in the manner of Arab merchants.
Okay, it really should be Ishmaelite merchants. If you remember, who did the brothers sell Joseph
Ishmaelites.
into? So now this is just a Talmudic description of how you handled the Paschal lamb at the temple and then how you brought it back to your house. And they're saying the way you brought it back to your house is the same way that Ishmaelite merchants carried their property that they purchased. So the rabbis are saying, pretty interesting. Yeah, like, why would they say like you do it like Arab? I'm sure other people carry things like this that weren't Arab merchants. I don't know, right?
I would hope so. I would think it's.
Right, it's like, why
The way you carry
specific,
things in those
why
days.
specifically are they saying this here? So there's this Rabbi Kluger, who has a really long commentary on this. But the most important thing is,
Probably the old stuff.
I shouldn't say this. So do we sacrifice a lamb anymore, a Paschal lamb anymore?
There is no
You
mikdash.
might know that there are some Sephardic Jews who have a practice, well, not just that, I'm talking about something else, that the afikomen, they do other things with the afikomen that sort of represent the Paschal lamb. And one of it is when they have the afikomen, after they break it for yachatz, and as they're putting it away, they put it on their shoulder and they carry it around the room. Like this. Like this, with the afikomen. You might not do it, but there's different Sephardic Jews who do it, and this is what he writes about it. Mike, you want to read? But since
they carried the remainder of their dough tied up in their garments, like the way of Ishmaelite merchants, as Rashi explained, they remembered that this enslavement was for the sin of the sale of Yosef, and automatically they would know that they did not deserve by rights any compensation.
Okay, right, so now the rabbis have taken it to a point, right? So why are they carrying the afikomen like this? And why did they carry the Paschal lamb like this? Because this was some remembrance that this is how Joseph was sold. This is how they saw him being carried away by the Ishmaelite slave traders. Yes.
So is this, I mean, to me, this sounds like the early version of the Jesus story. Joseph was the sacrifice that resulted in.
Oh, sacrificial lamb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he wasn't killed.
Well, but he lived as, we were earlier, we were trying to make claim that he had an awful life and, his life was altered forever. So his sacrifice maybe wasn't death, but the life that was not his own. In many reasons.
Right, or as Sheila said, right, there was this purpose, this higher purpose, or so whoever said it, right? Right, to then save the family and save the people. There is something, right? I mean, there is a guilt story somewhere, and that's why this is called a ghost story. She's calling it a ghost story. Right, so like. I mean, Isaac, right? Isaac also, right? There's a way of looking at the story of Isaac. So yes, there is something here, and obviously this predates that. Right? I mean, the Joseph story is much more ancient than the New Testament.
Jesus is often considered the Paschal Lamb. in
Mhm.
Christianity.
100%. So yes, right? And obviously these rabbis are writing later than the New Testament. So yeah, there's something here, but again, this is how do we deal with grief? How do we, maybe not this isn't grief, how do we deal with guilt? Right? And what do we do with it? I will give you a third option, which is karpas. Karpas. This one I knew before because my Haggadah talks about it, that I use a different night. So there are two commentaries. This is the first commentary. Do you know the Ben Ishchai is a very famous Sephardic rabbi and commentator. And someone want to read his comments. The first act of dipping, Sherry.
First act of dipping karpas in vinegar is the memory of the fact that the enslavement was because of the fail of Yosef, and that his brothers dipped his coat in blood and caused pain to his father Yaakov.
Okay, we're gonna stop here. Then he's gonna get into this funky letter thing, which we'll talk about. So the Ben Ishchai says, why do we dip so many times, right? The first dip that we do of karpas in vinegar is in memory of the fact of the enslavement was because of the sale of Yosef. The brothers dipped the coat in blood and caused pain to Jacob. Now, what do we dip in?
Salt water.
Salt water. So there is a tradition, salt water is actually later. Originally, that it was, karpas was dipped in vinegar. And they used what color vinegar back then?
Red.
Red.
Of course.
Dipped in red. Red vinegar back then, not white vinegar like we usually use, right? So if you dip it in red vinegar, what does it look like? A little bit blood, right? So he's suggesting that the act of dipping karpas in vinegar is already beginning, and karpas is before Magid, before we actually tell the story. Right, so one of the first acts that we do when we sit down at the Seder is dip, acknowledging that this action is what sort of brought the whole Exodus story to happen, brought slavery to happen. And then you get this whole word things. This word is alluded in the word karpas, if you see how it's spelled in Hebrew there, even though it's sort of Greek, right, which has the letters kaf resh, right, are the last letters of the word sail, mecher, and the letters pei samech are the first letters of the striped coat, pasiv. So yeah, we don't have to look at that. A little better commentary is, yeah, so you can see they talk about that it has some sort of blood reference too. And this is Rabbi Jonathan Sachs Haggadah. So someone want to read this one? There is symbolic meaning.
Of course. There is symbolic meaning to these two actions. The exodus from Egypt began with an act of dipping and ended with an act of dipping. It began when Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery. They slaughtered a goat, dipped Joseph's coat in the blood, Genesis 37:31, and brought it to Yaakov to convince him that a wild animal had attacked and devoured Joseph. The selling of Joseph into slavery in Egypt was the beginning of the long process by which Yaakov's entire family descended to Egypt and eventually became a nation of slaves. The exile ended when the Israelites took a bunch of hyssop, dipped it in the blood of the Pesach sacrifice, and sprinkled the blood on the doorsteps of their house. Exodus 12:22. God passed over the houses of the Hebrews during the final plague he brought upon Egypt, and afterward they went free. These two dippings remind us of these events. The carcass, which is sweet on its own, is dipped in salt water, and its taste becomes sour. The bitter herb, which is bitter on its own, is dipped in the sweet charoset, and some of its bitterness is removed. These two actions remind us that freedom, which is sweet, changes its taste for the worse when we use it to mistreat others. Slavery, which is bitter, is sweetened when collective suffering turns into human solidarity, thus becoming a prelude to freedom.
Good.
Comments? So yeah, beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful.
I'll tell you what I picked up early on in the first half,
Yeah,
was that the first dipping was in a goat, and the second dipping, never mind, it doesn't work.
other comments, thoughts? It was very, very powerful. Right, there are two acts that look familiar. Right, the story begins with this is the Exodus, right? Like, again, where do we start the story, right? We're gonna start the story with this dipping of the blood. Right, and the whole conspiracy to deceive their father and to sell off their brother. And then it ends with the blood that saves them. As the angel of death passes over their house and they prepare for the Exodus. Okay, so to sort of, as we're gonna move to conclusion. When the brothers are about to sell Joseph, what are they doing? Eating. Here we have the verse, Genesis 37:25. Then the brothers sat down to a meal. Looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, their camels bearing gum balm and ladanum to be taken to Egypt, ladanum.
Yeah.
Right, and then the sale happens. So this is a little bit of how Rabbi Tali Adler ends it. I recommend you watch the video and learn, because she obviously expands this and has very powerful teaching, and the way that she teaches is very powerful. Just to give a little bit of the answer. The story begins with Joseph's sale. The brothers are eating as a family. Would you describe that as an ideal family? Right? That is, at the moment, their brother is in a pit right next to them.
Yeah.
Right? By the way, also, it was their brother who lauded himself over them, who shared his dreams about how he was going to be so much better than them, and that his parents favored and loved him more than anyone else.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of issues, not just with the brothers, with this family situation and family dynamics that we're looking at. Right? So we have this, let's say, fractured family dinner to start. And now, if we sort of move forward, when we think about the Exodus and the eating of the Paschal lamb, what are they doing? In Egypt, that final meal before they leave, they're eating as a family, right? So they are almost reenacting and redeeming that fractured family meal, right? And trying to fix it. So when we gather at our Pesach Seders in just a few nights, are we in some way going to redeem the brothers, redeem Joseph, redeem Jacob? Right? Are we going to try our best to gather people together, to gather families together, and to tell Joseph we did it? We can acknowledge our mistakes. We can eat together at one table. And in that way, we can all be redeemed. So, thank you for learning. with me.
I have a question. You said something about a tape or a recording.
Oh, Yeah, if you Google her, yeah, I will show you. Right, if you just Google, yeah, you can go and do this at home. Rabbi Tali Adler, and just put ghost. There we go. It's this lecture right here. You can watch it on YouTube. Okay? Yeah, you can watch it on YouTube. So we're gonna stop the share. Everyone should have a Chag Kasher v'Sameach, a very happy, healthy, meaningful, peaceful, joyous, and ghost-worthy, redeeming Pesach together.
Amen.
Thanks for learning with. I hope you gave some food for thought.
Always learn something